see something in these pictures that it gave me an idea that I either didn't like and wanted to redo. When I was waiting on these pictures, slack times, a lot of times, I would keep it here like this, and I would go back and I would draw these pictures, or I would draw here. And then if I hear her come back on, I would these pictures just right away. I would write down what I heard there so that I could turn back. Turn back. These pictures. Turn back. Turn back. Turn back. These pictures. Help me. Turn back. Help me. Turn back. Help me. These pictures. Turn back. Help me. Turn back. Heard help me. Help me. Turn back. Heard help me. These pictures. Help me. Turn back. Heard help me. Help me. Heard help. Waters hide. Turn help me. These pictures. Heard help me. Yes, waters hide. Help me. Heard help me. Yes, help me. Waters hide. Heard help me. These pictures. Yes, help me. Heard waters hide. Turn back. Help me. Heard help me. Turn back. Help me. She said that so many times. Help me. Earhart. She said that so many times. Earhart. She said that so many times. Earhart. Earhart. Help me. Earhart. She said that so many times. Earhart. Help me. Earhart. She said that so many times. Help me. The thing that was different was the button. She said that so many times. That she could have been saying the Amelia Earhart Putnam. And even said more about the Earhart Putnam. Amelia Earhart Putnam. Amelia Earhart. And when I couldn't make out something, I'd put what I thought it was, Amelia Earhart. And sometimes when I would hear those clear words, I still would have to put down what I thought it was, not what it might have been. Amelia. Help me. Heard help me. And I would just write down, when the waters hide, her voice. She said that so many times that she could have been saying Amelia Earhart Putnam. Several times she said SOS. And then he started wanting to get onto the radio. Amelia said, "Stop."
Stop, stop, stop.
She fought him off quite a lot of times.
Stop, stop.
Because she was crying. And that's when she got back on. And then she's the one that said, "Help us quick." "Come here just a moment." That's when she started trying to get him to stay into the cabin. Well, they were both shouting a lot of times, making their voice high and to be heard. But his voice came through a little better. His voice, when he actually was on that radio, was a lot clearer than hers. Deeper. And he was more agitated. "Help, I need air. Help, I need air. Help, I need air. Help, I need air." Because right in there was where it was very definite that he was out of his head from the head injury, and his head was hurting, and there was times when she would say, "I know you're suffering." At that time was one of the times that they'd had around, like they had of him trying to get out, or not wanting to get out. Yeah, because that's when he took over, because he's the one that said, "Mary, Mary."
Mary, 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 Mary.
And he could have possibly said, if they could hear me. She said it a lot of times too. Water. Water. She's the one that always talked about the water. Yeah, saying, "Let me out." Yeah. I felt like it was a space where it was hard for her to get away from the radio. And they wrestled around when he would try to get on. She's saying, "Where are you going? Are you so scared?" And the hello, bud. I would for her like a resignation, just I've got to get some normalcy here. That type of a feeling that you get from her. And then with him, he was so uncomfortable and so miserable that they would just talk, and then he would kind of get out of his head again. I had to hurry and copy down all of this because she was real excited. Are you there? And it was fuzzy for me to hear. And the hear from me, hear from me. Are you there? Do you hear from me? Do you hear from me? That's the way that those two would come over a lot of the time. It would just, you could almost feel that you were, like if you'd hear the neighbors. Hey. Tell my husband George to get the suitcase out of my closet in California. Hey. Hey, watch that battery. Can you help me get that? Hey. SOS. Watch that battery. Can you help me get that SOS? All right. And the Amelia here is, the Amelia Earhart. She would keep coming back. Knee deep over. It's getting over now. It's getting over. Well, my memory is goddamn son of a bitch. I was never really sure about the New York humor.
And there it is, folks. That's Betty's Notebook from beginning to end. Thank you, folks, for sticking around and for listening to it, and um, just experiencing it with us. It's always a really powerful really powerful experience for me, and I think for all of our team. I remember the first time we listened to this, Tony and I, like we literally started like crying because this piece has like some really powerful bits, and it's a really powerful and strong message. We're talking about a woman who, from a very young age, was not believed, that spent the rest of her life taking this notebook and showing it to researchers and scientists and museums, um, and was never believed. And only until the early, like when she was already 80 years old, in the early 2000s, that's the first time that she was taken seriously and that the notebook was given proper treatment. So we're proud and honored to be a part of that legacy, to make the notebook live on, and to make people inspired to do more research about it, and all of that stuff. So we have a little bit of time for questions. And this is probably one of the only times you'll get to see both myself, Tony, Brian, Nick, some of the choir members that were associated with this project in the same room. So this is a really unique and great time to be able to ask us questions. So please feel free. If you have any questions, I'd love to be able to answer them, or one of the people on our team would love to be able to answer them. Feel free to raise your hand, or just unmute yourself, and let's talk about the piece a little bit.
Could you re-explain the part, the like circumstantial evidence part that you were commenting on? Like I kind of got it, but I couldn't tell which perspective we were. Or yeah, can you just re-explain it a little bit?
Yeah.
The
So
suitcase part.
Yeah. So there's a section where Betty says, and then I heard on the radio Amelia saying, "Tell my husband George to get the suitcase out of my closet." George was Amelia Earhart's husband. And what we later found out, or the researcher of the notebook, Rick Gillespie, was that within that suitcase was a letter that Amelia Earhart wrote right before she went on the flight in case of her death. And so that letter was to be heard, or to be read by George, her husband, in the case that she died. And so one of the compelling circumstantial pieces of evidence is the fact that Betty hears Amelia say, "Tell my husband George to get the suitcase out of the closet." And that's the piece of evidence that is so strange, because we didn't have social media in 1937, no phones, nothing like that, no text messaging. No one would have known. Like a 15-year-old girl in St. Petersburg, Florida, had no way of knowing that Amelia Earhart even wrote a letter and put it in a suitcase in a closet at that point. And so from that perspective, like the fact that Amelia says this on the transition, or on the transmission, the distress call, and Betty picks it up, someone that's random, adds to this like mystery and to this like compelling nature of what Betty's notebook is, because this is something that people have really like questioned, and that just that those words are circumstantial, I don't want to say proof, but evidence that supports the fact that the notebook is real, and what Betty heard is actually true.
I have a question for the singers. Is this the first time some of the singers have heard Betty's notebook in this iteration? And if it is, what do they think?
Barrett, or anyone else in the choir that's here, happy to hear your thoughts.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Is this the first time you've heard it recorded? And if it is, what are your thoughts on it?
So I've heard it once before. I think a few weeks ago we had a listening Zoom that the choir was invited to, but this is the first time since then that I've heard it, and I think it sounds so cool. It's really neat to hear the jazz standards put in there, because those were really fun to record. We didn't get to hear the soloists when we were recording them, so to hear that all together is really cool, and that filter that makes it sound like the 1930s radio is really cool. So, yeah.
And what is, through recording this and making this, did you learn anything new about anything more, another perspective of Betty's story?
That's a tough
Barrett,
question. Let me think about it for a second.
okay.
And if anyone else has questions, give me a second to think if I learned anything else.
I will say this. As a singer, the ensemble members did not get to hear like this whole soundscape. And so when I one of some of the biggest surprises that we actually got when some of the choir members heard the piece was that they're like, wow, I didn't even think that this soundscape, like when you're in it, you're just trying to focus on like the character and the complexity of the choir part itself, but then when you zoom out and you hear all of the other parts in tandem, it becomes something like completely different. And because this piece is so so dense with imagery and symbolism, it really takes zooming all the way out to be able to see the whole picture in its entirety. And I think that many singers were just like very focused on like making sure that the character and the like the rhythmic intention and the harmonic structure were all sound as they were singing it. So I think that that was one of the biggest feedbacks that we got.
I totally agree with what Sam is saying, and I will also add one thing that I didn't get from the performance in 2019 when we did it, but I got it so clearly listening to it now is the section where we first feel that we've hit the water and that we're just suspended in time and space in the water. And I sent this piece to one of my friends, and she listened to it. She thought it was amazing, by the way. But I said, "Did you hear the section where it sounds like we're in the water?" And she was like, "Absolutely." So I think that was a really clear part of the narrative. Listening back to it, that like Sam was saying, when we're looking at the score, especially when we're recording, it's a little bit more high stress. We're trying to get everything exactly perfect. So hearing the overall soundscape is harder when you're in that mindset. But listening to it, there's some really clear stuff.
Ryan, I know you probably want to ask a question here. I do just want to point out really quickly. Achilles asked a question, and by the way, Achilles is a member of HMLTD and is here with us. Also, Mighty 33 is here with us. Both folks released on Async Music this past week, so please make sure to go check them out. Both HMLTD and Mighty and Connie and RAC, all of them did a really fantastic job. Achilles asked, Sam, I wanted to ask you how you think classical music in particular and blockchain-based technologies will interact in the short and longer term. Do you feel there's something in particular about classical choral operatic compositions that would work well with distributed systems? The answer is, and this is something that I've told the Async Art team from the beginning, classical music has a particular strength in that it is already sort of like it's different sections coming together. So within a choir, you have a soprano voice, an alto voice, a tenor voice, a bass voice. In an orchestra, you have the strings, you have the winds, you have the percussion, and so on and so forth. And in that sense, it makes things really interesting because on one hand, when you listen to a choir, it just sounds like a choir. It doesn't sound like a whole bunch of voices coming together. But when you're able to separate that and when you're able to sort of play around with that, you actually get to hear some of the intimacies and some of the small little intricacies of what a choir sounds like. And I think that the same thing applies to orchestral instruments and opera and so on and so forth. Lots of times, especially with opera, we're talking about individual voices, and we always talk about how individual voices have different different textures and timbres, and they all sound unique. They all have a unique quality to them, and the ability to be able to sing the same passage of music with multiple different voices, for example, adds like a layer of sort of intimacy that we wouldn't generally be able to see and be able to tell. So from that perspective, I do think that this is like a really unique way of presenting the medium, and a really unique way of being able to you know, experiment and have the audience be a part of the artistic process of what choral music making, opera, and generally speaking, like orchestra and other stuff, like how it works and the intricacies of it. The last thing I'll just say on this, I'm very passionate about bringing classical music to wider spread of audiences, and this is the mission of what Verdigris Ensemble does. And so in essence, this technology allows us to take our audiences and literally bring them in to the process of what this is. And in that way, we're actually like allowing them to see some of the intricacies and some of the inside parts of what this is. And from that perspective, I think it's really powerful. It's a really, really interesting use case. It's not the only one. I do think that like there's so many different genres that would like work so well. EDM, pop, as we've seen with HMLTD, hip hop, as we've seen with Kanye and Mighty, EDM, as we've seen with RAC. All these mediums provide something. I do think that there's a very strong use case for classical music here. Ryan.
And I want to make a comment about blockchain technology and the music industry in general. As administrator for Verdigris, one of the big things I do is I pay people. And what's really interesting about blockchain technology is the ability to instantly pay every contributor their fair share every time there's a purchase of the music. This is something that, if you're familiar with Imogen Heap, she's very passionate about and talks about, where it's common in the recording music industry for some like musicians that like aren't even credited on an album to get paid maybe 3 years after the project is done. Obviously, that's not good. But what's nice about blockchain is that as soon as you, like what Imogen Heap did with a song she did called Tiny Human, every time you purchase a copy of the MP3, you do it through a blockchain space with your cryptocurrency wallet and all of that. And as soon as your payment goes through, it's instantly broken up into everyone that contributed on the project. So that $1.29 instantly is distributed completely fairly and as agreed upon. So what's really interesting about Betty's notebook and how this incorporates, like we had a mixture of people that were paid up front and people that will get share of every sale of Betty's notebook. For example, our singers got a very standard upfront, here's your fee, your payment for recording the piece, but they also get a percentage every time the piece is sold. So that's really good for making sure everyone gets payment and continues getting payment as the piece continues its life as an NFT.
Well said. Ryan, thanks for your patience.
Oh yeah, of course. I'm really happy that you shared this and are able to participate and share this with all of you. I'm really excited by this, and it was great just to hear just that little bit about paying musicians and making sure that they are recognized for their work and everybody else involved in the project. And I think that's maybe one of the most attractive aspects of working with blockchain and artists. So that's really great to hear right off the bat. And then I'm really curious, now that you've done this work, obviously you planned it, you conceived it, it's a team of people collaborating together, lots of different opinions and visions. I'm curious, what did you learn along the way, and what has that kind of informed for the next piece? What's next? Do you see it really evolving from here, or do you feel like this is an idea that you want to flesh out a little bit before moving on?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that Brian is an amazing person to sort of like answer that question. But before I just mention that, I do want to just give you a shout out, Ryan, and let everybody know that Ryan runs something called the NY Sound Circuit, which does a lot of very interesting performances in the New York area in several different really interesting performance spaces. I'll put a link in the chat, but do go check it out. It's a really fascinating space, and some of the tracks that they've done, I took a listen, and it's like amazing. So without further ado, Brian, take it away.
Um, well, to answer your question, what are the next steps? I think there's a lot of possibilities, and Sam and I have talked about, what are we going to do with the jazz standards, and how what will this evolve into next? And it's kind of open ended, and I think there's also, whoever collects this piece will have a bit of a say in that as well, because this is a giant collaboration, and we're about to on board more collaborators as collectors that will have control over this music to a degree. And so I think it's still very much a work in progress. And we continually told ourselves that this was not a finish line; it was a stepping stone, and we're stepping on to the next thing after this. And so I think the positive response only encourages us to see what else we can accomplish with this so far. What do you think, Sam?
And I would love for Nick and Tony to chime into this too. I'm learning a lot, and I had this in the beginning. I really had this fear that we would take this piece, and like no one would quite understand it, or no one would sort of connect with it, especially in the blockchain space, because the blockchain space is like 1 month in the blockchain space is like 10 years in the real world, in the sense of how quickly everything moves. Even in the last like 2 days, the price of several cryptocurrencies went up by like something like 24%, which is just literally unheard of on the stock market and everywhere else for all of our more traditional listeners here. I've learned that, like, to not be afraid of presenting works like Betty's Notebook, so long as we can really explain it and build bridges with it to new audiences. And also, in turn, what I've learned is that, like, people on the, like, it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're a traditional listener, you go to the symphony, or you're on the blockchain, and you're sort of like and you're listening to 40 seconds, 30 seconds. Like, if you can build that bridge to people, then like, it doesn't matter what the piece is, as long as there's an intention, and you're saying something. That's the most important. And I will say that, like, that was the biggest intention that I had going into this process. And I made sure to, like, work and surround myself with people that, number one, were a lot smarter than me, and number two, that were also a lot more creative than I was, and number three, that were, like, really, really wonderful people and down to earth people to work with. And so from that perspective, like, the ability to work with Brian, who generally works at, like, Saturday Night Live, has like a background listening to, like, bands, like his family is, like, sort of playing in bands here and there, but, like, to have him sort of, like, over time get, like, build an appreciation and build, like, oh, I understand that, oh, that makes total sense, oh, like, I'm gonna incorporate that into the artwork. Or, like, Tony, who has known Nick since they were college friends, and I've known Tony since I was 14. He was one of my first choir directors. To be able to, like, get into a space with them, and then share that vision, and then collectively find a bigger thing, I think that was what made this entire journey so worth it. But Nick and Tony, if you guys have anything to add, would love to hear from you as well.
I would, and it's adding to what Tony wrote. So Tony, jump in any time and just add to what I say or interject. One of the biggest things I learned from this experience is that we all are from the same planet. I think sometimes in the classical world, that elitist bubble that's put over it creates the impression that there's only a certain amount of people who get this high, refined, pure, quote unquote, form of art. And there's a big cultural disconnect between the two. And then what happens is you don't necessarily go out of your way to reach people. It almost becomes a clique or a cult. And they try hard. They put in bars, and they try to bring in younger people to the concert halls, but they're still programming the same music or they'll still consider a piece written in 1914 to be contemporary music. And so it shows how disconnected the classical world is from the popular world. However, the most refreshing thing I heard was when I joined a clubhouse last week, and you had people who weren't necessarily in the classical world, but they still have ears. We're from the same planet. We all live in 2021. We're surrounded by the same events and realities. And what I've found really refreshing is just how it connected with people. It's a story. And if the story is told clearly and it's told in a compelling way, I think we can reach as many more people than before. And the reason we can reach many more people is because of the platform. I was talking to Sam, the medium is the message. Having digital art shown this way where anyone can access it, but then you have a certain group of people who actually compensate you for it. It incentivizes the musicians, but it also allows more people to get interested into the process. And it also meets them where they are. They don't have to go to a concert hall. They can listen on their phone. They can listen on their desktop, on their tablet. And I think this breaks down many, many boundaries for people who otherwise may be interested in this type of music, but it's never been presented to them in a format or venue where they would likely hear music. So this is groundbreaking on many, many different levels. Go ahead, Tony, if you have anything.
Yeah, I mean, Nick, you're absolutely right. And I'm glad you all showed up today for my lecture. So this is one of the things I deal with on a regular basis, is explaining how we subvert this expectation in our communities so that we get people interested in the great literature that has been written, but also the new literature that is being written. And still, like, music composition is a living, breathing thing. Something happened in the 19th century where composers and conductors started to get put on a pedestal, and not just the one they'd stand on in front of the orchestra, but actually a pedestal metaphorically, where they would be considered these great geniuses.
Absolutely.
And it was like divine inspiration, that because prior to the 19th century, you would go out, you would go to a concert of what we can now consider classical music. It was the popular music. You'd drink, you'd cheer, you'd talk through the concert. You wouldn't sit there in your chair and look at everyone who opens a candy wrapper, with a side eye. So all of this changed going into the 20th century. We are still giving concerts like the 19th century. And so that's part of the mold that we're breaking. I've been breaking it on the college level. Sam is really just challenging the professional choral world with what is acceptable performance practice. And so this kind of thing is just going to feed that ever-growing change.
I think with the decline of Christianity in Western culture, the decline of religious experiences, you start to see this in Wagnerian opera, where the Wagnerian opera itself became a ritual. You had to make a pilgrimage to go to Bayreuth to see the Ring Cycle. And you had to know and do research on all these mythological symbols in order to understand a Wagnerian opera. And the reverence, the quietude, the attire, wearing a tuxedo for an event. On Mozart's day, they threw chicken bone wings on the stage if they didn't like the piece, and the symphonies were preludes and postludes. By the time you get to the end of the 19th century, the concert hall has been turned into a temple. And so one of the things I'd like to encourage people, and this is coming from someone who's very religious, is stop making music into a religion. If you want a religion, go to a mosque, go to a synagogue, or don't do anything. Make up your own religion, go to church. But we have to separate the two, that music can be used for religious purposes. It can be used for spiritual purposes. It can be used for cultic purposes. But I think what happens is we have a desire in us for the transcendent. But the issue is does that mean the transcendent comes at the cost of alienating people with a certain etiquette that sort of brushes people off as being untouchables? And that's something that we have to really reconsider in classical music.
I have one more thing to say, and then you can all get me your essays by Tuesday at 11. Okay. I have one more thing to say, and that is that I agree with Nick. And recording, I believe this for a while. Recording gives us the opportunity to allow the listener to listen how they want to listen, to experience how they want to experience. It's not a substitute for live music, because it never will be. We even with our great technology right now, we don't have the capability of recreating a truly live experience through headphones. However, we're getting closer and closer and closer. And for the person that wants to sit there and drink and talk with their friends and shout while they listen to music, they've got recordings to do that. And by us helping people understand that any way of taking in the art is acceptable, then we break molds, then we move forward.
And take it or leave it. There are no obligations. If you don't want to listen to this piece or that piece, you don't have to, because there's such a giant world out there with different audiences. There's going to be an audience for this. What's brilliant about this whole experience, no matter what your genre is that you're going to be paired with an audience, and that audience is a global audience. So there's a niche in every country that would like this piece or that piece or this R&B piece or this hip hop piece or this rock piece or this classical piece. And so this breaks down a lot of the social stigmas and that we attach symbolically, which are also socioeconomic. So there's a lot that's layered underneath the classical world that has to be reassessed, because with COVID and a post-COVID world, a lot of it's going to be reassessed because of financial difficulties.
Yeah, and please cite your sources with Chicago Manual of Style. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, guys. We're going to wrap up here. I just want to start this off by saying thank you to everyone for being here tonight. This is really wonderful to have you, and to have you be with us, and to ask questions, and to share this music with you. I do also want to just say that Betty's Notebook, as of Sunday morning, very early in the morning, hit its reserve price. Woo! Of 56 ETH, or 181,000 for the master, and we've also hit reserves for all of our layers, which is fantastic. The auction ends on Saturday, and we'll continue to change. We'll continue to change the layers as we go. I was told that tonight so we'll send out a poll on our Twitter, and we'll ask you what you want. Make sure to vote, and then we'll go ahead and change it hopefully by tomorrow morning. With all of that said, please do follow. Help us if you liked what you heard. Please follow us and follow our Twitter, Instagram, Facebook if you have it, and tell people about the work that we're doing. I'd love to be able to talk with you more and have you come to future performances. We do have future blockchain releases in the pipeline, and we're excited to share it with you. So please follow Tony. Tony's on Twitter, Nick Reeves, Brian Brinkman, Vert Degree Ensemble, myself, and so on and so forth. So, and with that, I just want to give you a huge shout out once again for being here tonight, and for going on this journey with us. It's been really, honestly, like a big honor for us to be able to have this audience, and to have you be so enthusiastic about it. So thank you guys so much. Please be in contact, and we love you a lot, and please keep in touch. Thanks. See you soon, guys. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.